Well, good morning, everybody. In this Friday forecast video, I just want to kind of give you a layout of a couple of things I want to tackle. I've got questions about how things are going to shift in the tropics. As we move into the end of July, we know we've been watching for the chance for more tropical development. We're going to cover that first. I've got some content about the upcoming rain, where I think it's going to be drier across the country for maybe the next couple of weeks, but I still think we're in a wash, rinse, repeat pattern going into the month of August. After that, I am going to take just a deeper dive into the duration of the heat and then what I think might happen in August by looking at some recent analog years and the models. And then I'm going to stretch it out with a talk about La Niña and what maybe fall looks like. So just some things to think about as we go into this weekend. So you've been staring at a map that looks at the July velocity potential. So just remember, when you look at these maps, these colors over here represent where you have this rising motion in the atmosphere, and these represent where there's been sinking. So largely in this part of our tropical Atlantic, we've had, even in the Eastern Pacific, we've had just subsidence. The MJO has just lived over here. Now listen, this is really symptomatic of what the trade winds have been doing. Okay, so as we've talked about, we've had stronger trade winds, doing something like this for a while. That's just going to push rising motion into this area. And we expect that to shift around and move, right? So we've been talking all week about this. So again, let's look at it. The reds sinking, the greens rising. So you can still see a bit of a lid on the atmosphere over in this part of the world. While we've definitely got a big, strong one here in the Indian Ocean. All right, we're just watching, going through this weekend into early next week. And we start to see the models just kind of relieve some of that, which means that the tropics are going to be able to do their thing. They're going to be able to start to translate convection into more organized systems. And we just want to know if anything big is going to be coming out of that. Because right now, the National Hurricane Center's got a 10% chance out for some development along the Louisiana coast. And we're going to watch this move toward Texas. And what I'm expecting out of this, we've already seen it, is some heavy rainfall. And just some of these storms able to just dump the moisture that they've been fueled with on very strong winds around the base of the Bermuda High. Now, I like this map made by Tomer Berg here. He's got a great website, but he makes a very distinct break in the color bar at 26. So research has shown that you cannot get a hurricane to develop in ocean temperatures that are cooler than this, right? It's even difficult to maintain the hurricane strength. So I just want to point out that even though there's going to be a lot of debate this fall about ocean temperatures, it's still plenty warm enough to create these things. And that's all. I just want you to see, what's going on here. Okay, we know that, let's get that off there. We know that we still have some Saharan dust that's blowing across the Atlantic. And this is a tricky thing for a tropical system to ingest. It's very dry, dusty air. And as a result, we just tend to see the convection not able to organize or deepen as well as otherwise. And we've got quite a bit of it still going here to the end of July and the start of August, leaving the Sahara. But honestly, when you see this dust, it's giving us an indication of the winds that are moving from Africa. And given that Africa is kind of the birthplace of a lot of what we call these African easterly waves, these trigger points to get air to rise, this is possibly a signal that there's something important brewing as we get into August and September. All right, so let's just watch the Saharan dust now, but understand there are different implications going later in the season. Now, just so you kind of see how this works, of course, there's the Sahara Desert. It's massive. We have the rainforest to the south, and in between, right in through here, there's this area called the Sahel. And it's interesting. A lot of the large tropical thunderstorms that develop in this area are actually born out of flow leaving the Indian Ocean. And these storms just exist, and when they leave, they come out here across the open Atlantic. They follow the trade winds, and the trade winds have a little bit of a motion to them. Now, we talk about troughs in the northern hemisphere when the jet stream dips, right? But along the equator, the troughs are when it bulges north, and that's because there's low pressure along the equator. So you got to shift your thinking around. So what I'm talking about here is every time we see these little waves coming up, they could be, not now, but later in the season, the source. These are these African easterly waves. They could be the source of development of low pressure and around deeper tropical convection. So that's what we're going to watch. Now, I leave you at this animation because so much of this upcoming hurricane season will be dictated by the power and size of the Bermuda High, which is expansive. I mean, look at the size, of the Bermuda High as it currently stands. It's been that way for a while, and we want to know what it's going to continue to look like going forward. Last year, when we got into late August, the Bermuda High left the East Coast. It was most strongest as it got over toward Africa, which is a very unique thing. And that, by the way, is why later in the season, Helene was able to start here and go like straight north and then eventually turn back toward the west. There was no Bermuda high to pull Helene out to open ocean, which is quite typical. So just a kind of a piece of information there. We're actually going to come back and talk about last fall at the end of this video. So what do we see? Well, the models are responding to the removal of the suppression. And as we go over the next 10 days, watch what's coming off of the what we call the main development region, right there. We start to see some hint that something might be forming. And our ensemble models can be looked at several ways. This is just another way where we kind of track the individual low pressure centers in each of the ensemble runs. And the models are kind of hinting that something's coming out of this particular area. Now, it's not like crystal clear. There's no major indication that there's going to be some large system that is, going to leave this area and move its way toward the Lesser Antilles or maybe or more toward the Bahamas. But we're going to watch it because it's the time of year that we have to watch it. These storms become less of a phantom product of the model and start to become something a bit more real as we get into this time of year. Now, there was a little bit of noise around the Europeans' artificial intelligence forecast models yesterday. I'm going to show you this. This is just precipitation intensity and pressure. And I'm just going to go quick. We'll talk more about the details across the rest of the country soon. But what was interesting is this. Okay, so watch again. I'm going to go backwards. See where this is coming from? Right there. That is an area of low pressure, a bit organized in the in the European artificial intelligence. And it's just trying to take it toward the Bahamas and, maybe somewhere here. But this is August 7th. We're 324 hours in the forecast. But I'm just telling you that statistically, which is what this model is based upon, right? It's using historical evidence and historical correlations to make a future forecast. It knows that when you start to see something taking shape in the main development region, better watch it. And it's trying to put a system out there. And some of the models yesterday were having it hit Florida. Now, we just do this, okay? Understand there's not like some strong, evidence that that's going to happen. But I want you to all be aware that this is going to become a major part of our discussion going forward. Now, the area that was given a 10% chance of developing, it's got a large area of disorganized thunderstorms here. When I say disorganized, I mean they're not orbiting around some sort of unified, deeper area of low pressure and therefore taking on a counterclockwise spin. There is some indication of that spin in the low-level cloud field here, but what we're really just seeing is a lot of deep convection along the Gulf Coast with flash flooding. Now, while I was watching this animation, a couple of other things jumped out at me. I'm going to come back to northern Texas in a minute, but take a look at the size of the fire here in northern Arizona. Look at the smoke plume late in the day. Also more fires in parts of Utah. And that's pretty significant there, and we're going to see where that smoke is going to go quite soon. Elsewhere, before I kind of zoom in here to northern Texas, I want to point out more very heavy rainfall in Missouri last night, parts of Kansas, and this has been an area that's just been absolutely hammered as of late and having a difficult time getting away from very wet conditions. So just a couple things to point out, plus all of the big storms that continue to fire along the Front Range. Okay, Texas, this is kind of neat. Late in the afternoon, okay, look at all the clear air echo here that we've got in the Panhandle. Then, on the heat of the day, under these very weak little boundaries, can you see them here? We get some organized, let me not abuse that term. We get some convective initiation. These are just storms that start to pop. And they toss out their outflow, look at that. And the outflow initiates new storms. And it just is this self-generating machine of thunderstorms. And everywhere these boundaries collide, like I'm watching that guy right there, just moving toward the west. Look, new storms just explode. And you can get locally very heavy rainfall that hits, underneath these things. And, they just continue to propagate throughout the day, moving through Oklahoma into Kansas and up toward Missouri. So just a fascinating piece of the atmosphere to watch. So on the whole, there is a front that's sagging in through this area, and we're going to watch this area for very heavy rainfall today because you notice that front is not moving. Do you see that? It's right here, and just all throughout this long animation of radar, it's just sitting in this area. So we've brought in some relief from the heat north of it, but to the south of it, it's still very, very hot. And along that front, plenty of moisture. There's your storms coming up the Front Range. Take a look at Northern California and Nevada. And then here's the storms that are trying to organize around this very weak area of tropical low pressure down here along the Gulf Coast. Right. So from there, the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation looks something like this. And as Matt talked about yesterday, locally very heavy rainfall into this area. We are concerned that going forward, there's going to be a region in through here that we need to be aware of running kind of through a drought risk, a flash drought risk in this upcoming pattern. I'll explain more about that in just a few moments. But that's your last 72 hours. All right, next week. Can you see it? There is that drier area where all around the edge of it we're seeing quite a bit of heavy rain. I'm going to talk a bit about the Great Lakes as well. We're also going to think about the Canadian Prairie getting a bit drier. And again, over the next week, no major tropical development, so you don't see anything kind of coming through here. But you can tell where that boundary's stuck. I mean, it's sitting right into this area. And Matt kind of alluded to the reasoning behind that, just the shifting ridge that's moving through the pattern. So what we have this morning on our all hazards weather map, there is the excessive heat going on here and up the East Coast, which we continue to deal with. There's the flood watches issued. We have dense fog here, more heat problems, and this is all air quality, which we need to come back to. And then in Northern California, we have red flag warnings that are out right now. Speaking of the smoke, okay, we can see where the 48-hour forecast on smoke continues to put down these fires in Northern California, and then you can see the smoke coming back from the northern Arizona fire, spreading that wildfire smoke across, the rest of the Four Corners states into Wyoming, eventually getting into the Northern Plains, upper Midwest. And there is still smoke being provided from those Canadian wildfires here that's moving across the rest of the eastern side of Canada we need to pay attention to. But as I think about maybe the next few days in terms of severe storm and heavy rains, let's talk of heavy rains first. This is the CPC's outlook for the risk of excessive rainfall here today. So again, we watch that boundary stuck in the heavy rains that are going to fall on this. Again, tomorrow it's getting over into the eastern Corn Belt, also along the Gulf Coast. And then as we look at Sunday, we're going to watch Minnesota, Wisconsin, but also the mid-Atlantic to the northeast. And then we do see some monsoonal, surge coming on into parts of New Mexico. Severe weather-wise, North Dakota, keep an eye on it, and also here along the coast in the northeast. Just a couple of areas to be watching carefully. But just bigger picture, let's just do that, okay? I know you have a lot of different options to see the today weather, the monitoring of the severe weather. And that I often just focus on longer range. That's what I like. But take a look. This is the next 2 weeks, and I continue to see the models kind of finding some corridor in here of wetter weather. Did go drier in the Great Lakes, did go drier in the northern half of the Canadian Prairie, and we've got this area that needs to be monitored carefully, where to the south of it there's a tropical push around the high that's going to live here, and to the north of it there's ridge runners. And we definitely see this risk of a spot in through here that starts in Texas and goes to the mid-south, maybe clipping the Ohio Valley, that has the risk of being drier. I didn't say dry, but drier. Take note of this, too. Better chances for storms getting into the northwest after what has been one of the driest late springs through summer timeframes in that particular region. I just want to point out the GFS Ensemble has a very similar look, although just take note, it's trying to fill in more of Kentucky and Tennessee through the mid-Atlantic with better storms. I did hear from one of you last night, the coastal parts of North Carolina have been very dry. Remember back in, was that the end of June or the beginning of July? I have to go back and look, but we've had flooding in the interior, but very dry along the coast, and that seems to be a condition that's going to continue. The models are also drier in Florida, but we got to remember, if something comes out here, that could bring in some tropical moisture to Florida, and we can't ignore that going forward. So with that as kind of our bigger picture, can we just kind of watch maybe where the precipitation is going to accumulate in the models and maybe get a sense of the timing of it? So again, I'm working on these new maps for you. They just take a lot of time to develop, but we play through the weekend. There's into Sunday. There's your boundary, and there's your storms, and there's your storms, and there's your storms, right? These three different areas. As we get into, actually there's four. Don't forget the mid-Atlantic getting up to the northeast. As we get into next week, we continue to see the storms run the ridge that Matt talked so much about yesterday. And because that ridge tends to favor establishing itself over the southern plains, we tend to be drier here. And this is a problem because it's going to get and stay hot here. It's normal for this time of year. But you can see these areas of very, very wet conditions going forward. And it's also important to see where there's some drier pockets on my color bar here. And of course, the southwest, which we don't expect much here until we get fully into the monsoon season, which should be going in August. Okay. So with that, you kind of got a sense of the timing. You can always go to agweather.com and watch these individual runs, but let's just get into some probability maps. So looking for those drier areas, here's who has the chance of staying under a half inch for the next 10 days. And again, we find these same spots in the models. Okay. Chance of getting wetter than average, through here. Very wet conditions on the stalled boundary. The tropical moisture moving from east to west. And storms in the plains. Now, Matt and I have been questioning how far do these dip down into this region, and that's going to be challenging to figure out because we've been so wet here throughout the summer, not in the last few days, but in the summer. Actually, yesterday it stormed like mad here. What am I talking about? But we want to know that. We want to see if it can break down to that. And does the monsoonal moisture start to expand more into Arizona, which you just saw the wildfires there. So I want to show you something neat about our drought monitor. This is our current drought monitor. And because of the expansiveness of the Bermuda high and the presence of the Pacific high being here, right? We've talked a lot about that. Take a look at how our drought monitor has evolved. This is the newest one. This is how it looked at the beginning of, what day did I choose? April 1. This is April 1 to July, the latest update on July 22nd. So that was the spring, and here we are now. And you can see it pretty clearly. East Coast drought, central U.S. drought has been largely eliminated, and it's built into the west. Now we have pockets where we are still on the drought monitor, right? And there's pockets in the southeast. But it's an important thing to consider here. And again, I'll give all the credit to the fact that the Bermuda high stayed on. A lot of warm water moved into the Gulf of Alaska. That always, according to what I've been able to find, it's very difficult to find a year. In fact, I said always because I can't remember one, where warm water moved into the Gulf of Alaska and this didn't get dry all summer long, like much, much drier than average. And at the same time, this area just goes stormy. And we've seen that. Bermuda high's been in place, Gulf of Alaska's been warm, and that's a net effect. Now, since we kind of skipped over, we looked at a 14-day, we then looked at the week-long forecast, I do want to point out what's going on in week 2. And our AI model, significantly different than the ensembles, which is here and here. And it is important to note that even into week 2, if you don't mind, I'm just going to blow up the European, okay? Into week 2, quite a bit of thunderstorm activity here. I'm heading next week down to an event in Georgia to talk with some folks down there about hurricane season, all sorts of good stuff. But look at that. See that's what Matt was talking about. Better chances of bringing that moisture into place. Drier air here. And you're going to find a lot of folks in here, they're like, all right, we're fine with dry air. There's going to be some that needed the moisture. They're right in through there. But I just wanted to point out that this upcoming forecast isn't as unfavorable as I had been worried about for that first week of August. All right, from there, let's talk temperatures. Next 7 days, where is the stressful heat going to be? It's going to be where that ridge Matt talked about yesterday kind of migrates. It's here. Starting in the southeast, moving over toward the southern plains, kind of going back and forth. But the northern tier of the country, we've got cooler air that's coming in soon, and we need to get some of that cooler air in place. We've already dropped these overnight lows that were in the upper Midwest 10 to 15 degrees over what they were. So this morning, just a hair before 6 a.m. Central Time, boy, this is much cooler than it was a few days ago, just picking out a few areas. But we keep the humidity, keep the moisture on in the south, and the high overnight low temperatures. And again, just want to reiterate that you go back to the start of summer, the official start of summer, June 20th, the solstice, and it has been hot in the overnight low temperatures here. I brought up the tassel wrap issue and the rapid growth syndrome in my video on Wednesday, but I've got to talk to a lot of agronomists and seed specialists, and it was interesting to hear that when you walk through a field and see some tassel wrap, but you see open, tassel in other places, you've got to remember it's not a one-to-one. Like if you don't have tassel being exposed on one plant, that the crop won't pollinate. I mean, I was talking to one of our guys this morning, Steve Eichenberger. He always answers texts at like 5 a.m. I love that guy. But, he mentioned like you if you have, one or two tassel, it can pollinate most of that area that it lives in. So it's important to know that. But these overnight lows, we have questions as to what they did just overall to the quality of the pollination in this area. And some of those results may not be seen. And just take note, where it's been dry in coastal North Carolina, very hot in the overnight. Same thing for the mid-Atlantic, getting up into the northeast. It's been just muggy and very, very warm. So the overnight low temperatures, watch. This is today. I'm so cool. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Richard Mead. He works for us at Nutrien. He was on a call with us yesterday, and he was wearing a jacket in the Central Valley of California. Just crazy to think about. But take a look at these overnight lows. Friday morning, there's Saturday. We're just keeping them warm. That's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Now, you know that after next Wednesday, this all breaks. Cooler, drier air comes in. Heat goes back to the northwest. The heat suppresses itself into the southern part of the United States, and you'll see it in the high temperatures as well. Look at these high temperatures in the west. There's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, look at the heat coming back into the plains Midwest, anchored in the southeast. Very, very hot conditions here. Hot up the northeast by next Monday, Tuesday. And there it comes. There's that cooler weather diving in as we start the month, or finish July and start the month of August. So the heat is suppressed south, much cooler air coming in. It's in the ensembles pretty clearly. So yeah, the next 5 days looks like that. But as we slide out there, day 5 through 10, there it is. There's the cooler air invading, the heat coming back into pockets of like the northwest or the Intermountain West, and also the southwest. And that's how our first 8 or 9 days looks into the month of August. Okay, all of that being said, let's come back to some bigger picture things. Go to cpc.ncep, that's ncep.noaa.gov, or just Google Climate Prediction Center. And later on this afternoon, they're going to update this set of maps. It's their week 3, week 4 outlook, and I imagine it is going to look different. A week ago, we're watching MJO transition, right? Remember, we talked about that extensively this week. And it made sense that if the MJO returns in the beginning of August to phase 1, 2, and 3, what did it tell us, right? Big ridge, just a big ridge here. And therefore, storms all along the periphery, there and there and there, and that's hotter, drier inside of it. You know, we're all beginning to question that, and that's good. The forecasts evolve, of course, but I want to know if the CPC still thinks that's a real anchoring feature or if it is more transient. I am of the school of thought that this pattern goes on wash, rinse, repeat for August. So what do I mean by that? Late June heat wave, July early return to normal. Then we had the end of July heat wave, the beginning of August, back toward normal cooler, which means mid to late August, we're going to go back over to some heat, but is it here or is it there? And the storms are going to run the periphery of it because the Gulf is open and just dumping moisture. So the July outlook from the Europeans says, hey, we're going to dump storms in through this area. See it? It's no longer as dry. In fact, it extends all the way up into this part of the Canadian prairie. And I think that is maybe a little bit more robust of a signal as to where the August precipitation pattern may be. Now, thinking that through, I want to talk about the central United States. Okay, let's just focus on that for a second. So I went back, and I'm now looking at September and October because I got asked a lot yesterday about the risk of fall drought, what that means. And so I said, let's look at it. So in the central U.S. region, that's a huge region, I did this. And I noticed this kind of sawtooth behavior recently. So from 2020, actually, you can start this in 2019. Ready? It just goes wet, drier, wet, drier, wet, drier. Now, that doesn't mean that, oh yeah, you're going to do this year and then it's just going to, bounce. But a lot of times it does, okay? There are years, though, where it clusters together, where you have 3 years back to back to back, where you just kind of 3 dry falls. And then you have years where it's like wet, 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 So don't make that statistical error in your judgment just looking at the sawtooth nature of this. Because last fall, other than the moisture from Helene, which came in like this and hit this area, we were dry Central Plains, dry Southwest, dry Midwest, dry Northeast. And that was all because the Bermuda High left. It was just gone. It was in Africa. And while that was happening, look at what the ocean temperatures did. We were very, very warm here. This was spawning a powerful hurricane season. Again, as Matt talked about yesterday, look how warm the North Pacific was. No negative PMM signal, but look, La Niña coming in. Now think about that, La Niña coming in. Go to the year before that. We were wet in here. We were wet down there, wet in the Northeast, dry in pockets of the Southeast, Tennessee Valley, Appalachian Mountains, dry along a little bit of the Ohio River. Now, again, what time is this? This is September and October. A little bit drier in through here, but what a different signal from 2024. And of course, 2023, El Nino building. Still warm north, still warm Atlantic, but El Nino conditions building. Now, watch this. The year before, this would have been September and October of 2022. Very dry, Mississippi, Ohio, Missouri basin. A little bit wetter northeast. Active southwest monsoon continued. Okay, what was going on? What made this dry? Well, big time La Niña building. Still very warm, very warm. I mean, you see these consistencies versus where the change is going to be. So I bring all of that to your attention to show you this. We run these long-range historical correlation maps. There's 1940 to 2024, October, November, and I included December in this as well because the Climate Prediction Center has, by that point, a high probability of La Nina being the more dominant signal. Not strong La Nina, but La Nina-esque or La Nina-like. So he just said, look, it's south of that. We just tend to be a bit drier, historically correlating ENSO events. We tend to be wetter in the northwest and drier there. Okay. Now I show you all that because this is what our ocean temperatures have been doing since spring. Now watch right here in June. You're into June, mid-June, late June, July. Watch, ready? Matt brought it up yesterday. See the cooling trend there? We cannot argue that our trade winds have continued to be present and strong and moving stronger at times than normal. And there is just some cooler water surfacing here. Look at this over here in the Atlantic as well. And so what do we have again? Warm. Warm. Those have been the constant characteristics, but are we looking at a La Nina like, fall time period? Some of the models say yeah, and that's why they've done this. Wetter, drier, put a D in it. Wetter down here and wetter in the northwest. They are following this signal that La Nina may have an influence on fall. And that's August, September, October. And so is the NMME, August, September, October. Got drier signals here, wetter in the southeast and near normal in the northwest. I think this is a signal that we may need to start to use to inform our guidance. Now, what's going against it? What's going against it is we've not shut the rain off yet. The Bermuda high is in place. So I'm going to come back to the same thing I harp on like every single time I talk to you. Where's that Bermuda high going to be by the time we get fully past August into September? Is it still doing this? Or is it wafted off and run to the north or gone? As soon as that happens, as soon as I start to see some clear evidence of something changing, but then we're going to talk about it. But this is what I got for you. So a couple things to think about. We'll just pick this up again on Monday. Have a good weekend. Thanks.